Before we begin, a gentle notice. This story takes place during the First World War and contains sensitive themes related to childhood trauma, loss, and suffering. Although it is a narrative of hope and resilience, listener discretion is advised. Please take care.
My name is Virginia Castillo. I've lived nearly a century on this earth. I'm going to sit here in my living room in Valencia and have some tea. As the late afternoon light pours through the windows like a golden embrace, the scent of jasmine from the garden drifts softly through the air. Sit here with me. I want to tell you my stories. I want to record everything I lived through, everything that changed my life. How can it be that this same woman, me, Virginia, with white hair and trembling hands once walked the frozen corridors of a makeshift orphanage during World War II? How can it be that these eyes, now clouded by age, witnessed so much beauty born from so much horror? How can it be that these hands, now weak, once held children on the brink of death and brought them back to life? Memory is a strange creature. It chooses what to preserve and what to forget. But there are certain things that remain carved into the soul, like scars that never fade. And when I close my eyes, I can still hear them. The murmurs of the innocent, the echo of small voices, broken by fear. But I can also hear laughter, timid laughter that emerges when they finally remember what it was like to be children again. This handkerchief, my grandmother gave it to me before I left for France in 1941. "Take this little piece of home with you, Virginia," she said. "When the world becomes too dark, look at these flowers and remember that beauty still exists." I didn't know then that this handkerchief would be used to mend a traumatized girl's doll, that it would be transformed into a dress for a simple toy, powerful enough to restore hope to eyes that had known fear far too early. But let me go back to the beginning, when I was still just Virginia Castillo, the youngest daughter of the Castillo family in Seville. It was the year 1939. I was young, and the world, even far from there, was beginning to crumble. I grew up in a large white house with interior courtyards adorned with blue tiles and orange trees that perfumed our mornings. The fountains sang soft melodies while birds nested in the eaves. My father, Don Carlos Castillo, was a prosperous merchant, owner of vineyards that stretched across the hills of Andalusia like green carpets under the eternal sun. My mother, Doña Helena, was a woman of rare beauty, with a heart as kind as her melodious voice. In the afternoons, she played piano while I sat beside her, embroidering in silence. We had servants, horses, fine clothes from Paris, elegant dinners where conversations flowed like well-served wine, balls, parties, a protected and privileged life, perfect. And yet, I remember feeling empty, as if all that beauty was merely superficial, as if I were waiting for something I couldn't name, a purpose. The war seemed impossible in that wine paradise. It only reached us through newspapers my father read on the terrace during peaceful mornings. News about the invasion of Poland, about the Blitzkrieg in France, about soldiers dying by the millions. France, Belgium, Poland, they were just names on a map. Distant places where men we didn't know killed and died for causes we barely understood. Spain had just emerged from its own civil war, exhausted and devastated. We were officially neutral in this new conflict. We were safe, protected, isolated from the carnage consuming Europe. I was still quite young when the Spanish Civil War ended in April 1939. I read in newspapers about how Europe was marching toward another catastrophe, about how Hitler's Germany threatened everyone. Time passed. The war exploded across Europe in September 1939. Millions died, and I remained there, in my perfect house, living my perfect life, until that Sunday afternoon in June 1940, when everything changed forever. I was in the garden reading a book of poetry in the shade of our old olive tree, when I heard my mother talking with Doña Carmen, our neighbor. Doña Carmen had just received a letter from a cousin who lived in France, near the northern region where the German occupation was devastating everything. "You cannot imagine, Helena," she said, her voice choked. "The children. There are so many children, orphans, lost, abandoned. Some don't even know their own names. They live like wild animals in the rubble of bombed cities. There are makeshift orphanages in destroyed buildings, in roofless churches, in any place that still has four walls standing." My mother murmured words of compassion, but I felt something different. It was as if a cold fist grabbed my heart and squeezed it without mercy. Children, lost children, alone, afraid. While I was there, safe, protected, useless. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay staring at the ceiling of my room, thinking about those French and Belgian children who, at that very moment, might be cold, hungry, crying for their dead mothers. While I lay in Egyptian linen sheets, protected by fine wool blankets, they slept, if they slept at all, on stones and ruins, covered by rags. Guilt was like a slow poison spreading through my veins. What right did I have to happiness? What right did I have to comfort while innocent children suffered? In the following days, I began seeking news about the war with an obsession that worried my family. I read every article, every report, every testimony I could find. I learned about the fall of France in June 1940, how the country had collapsed in just 6 weeks under German attack, about the Vichy governments, collaboration with the Nazis, about the formation of the resistance. But what marked me most were the stories about the children, orphans wandering the roads, babies found alone in bombed houses, children too small to understand what had happened, searching for parents who would never return. And the more I read, the more a terrible and luminous certainty grew within me. I had to go. I had to help. The decision wasn't rational. It wasn't calculated. It was like a call from the depths of my soul. A voice saying, "Rise, Virginia, go. They need you." I announced my decision to my family during dinner on a Thursday in March 1941. The silence that followed was deafening. My father stopped with his fork raised. My mother turned pale. My brothers looked at me as if I had gone mad. "Virginia," said my father, his voice carefully controlled but with firmness underneath. "You are a young woman from a good family. This is not your place. My place is where I can be useful, Father. Useful." My older brother Miguel laughed bitterly. "Virginia, you don't even know how to cook properly. You've never worked a day in your life. What do you think you're going to do in a war zone?" "I'll learn," I replied, surprised by the firmness of my own voice. My mother began to cry. "Daughter, you don't understand. That's no place for a young woman like you. It's dangerous. It's barbaric. There are diseases, hunger, bombings. You could die. And that's exactly why I need to go," I replied. "If everyone who can help stays safe, who will care for those who cannot protect themselves?" Weeks of arguments, pleas, and veiled threats followed. My father tried to forbid me. My mother tried to convince me with tears. My brothers called me crazy, a romantic idealist, a spoiled child seeking adventure. They proposed compromise solutions. "Donate money to charities," said my father. "Organize events here in Seville to raise funds." "Money isn't enough," I replied. "They need hands, hearts, presence." But I was no longer the Virginia they knew. Something had awakened within me. something that could not be silenced or persuaded. It was as if I had discovered my true nature, my true purpose. One morning in April 1941, while my parents slept, I left a letter on my father's desk. Dear parents, forgive me for leaving this way, but I know that if I waited for your blessing, it would never come. I'm going to France to help in war orphanages. I'm not going as an adventurer, seeking thrills, but as your daughter, raised in the values of compassion and generosity you always taught me. When the war ends, I'll return home. But now there are children who need me, and I must answer this call. With all my love, Virginia. I took only a small suitcase, some family jewels I could sell if necessary, and the linen handkerchief my grandmother gave me. Before I left, she called me to her room. Her wrinkled hands, marked by age, held mine with surprising strength. I knew you would go, she said softly, looking deeply into my eyes. You have fire in your soul, girl. Fire that doesn't extinguish with tears or threats. Go and do what your heart commands. She placed the handkerchief in my hands. It was a square of white linen with small blue flowers embroidered in the corners. She had made each stitch herself with care. When the world becomes too dark, she said, when you think you can't continue anymore, look at these flowers. Remember that beauty still exists, that it's worth fighting for. At that time, I didn't know that this handkerchief would become witness to miracles, that it would be used for purposes my grandmother never imagined, that it would become the most precious object I would ever possess. The train journey to the French border was long and lonely. With each kilometer away from home, I felt the weight of my decision. Fear, doubt, but also something stronger, certainty. When I finally crossed the border and stepped on French soil for the first time in May 1941, I knew there was no turning back. The war was calling me, and I was answering the call. The crossing through France was like a slow descent into hell. At each stop, the landscape transformed. The occupied zone was a place of fear and oppression. German soldiers everywhere, their harsh voices, their cold stares. French people walking with heads down, defeated. Prosperous cities gave way to bombed villages, and then to ghost towns. Fields that were once green were now brown. Scars on the earth. Leafless trees stretched their branches like supplicating arms to the gray sky. The train that took me to my final destination was an iron monster that creaked under the weight of war. I shared the car with wounded soldiers, exhausted nurses with dark circles as deep as scars, refugees carrying their entire lives in bundles tied with rope, women in black, war widows who would never wear another color. The silence was more deafening than any scream. I was getting closer, ever closer to the place where I could finally be useful. The station where I disembarked barely deserved that name. It was little more than a cracked wooden platform with a small building that had once been painted blue, but was now a pale shadow of its original color. A middle-aged man, with a face marked by premature wrinkles and a poorly trimmed gray beard, waited for me on the platform. He wore a patched black coat and held a piece of paper with my name scrawled on it. Mademoiselle Castillo. His voice was hoarse, as if he had shouted too much and for too long. Yes, I replied, my French still hesitant and with a strong Spanish accent. I am Father Antoine. Welcome to what's left of civilization, he said without irony, simply stating a fact. Follow me. We walked along a potholed road, lined by fields that had once been green and were now brown scars on the earth. Bomb craters dotted the landscape like open wounds. Here and there, makeshift wooden crosses marked graves. The orphanage, said Father Antoine as we walked, is in what's left of the Château de Montclair. It was a beautiful property before the war. The Montclair family lived there for generations. But when the Germans came, they fled south. The castle was partially bombed, half destroyed. But what remains? Well, it's solid enough to offer shelter. And shelter is all we have to offer. And then I saw it. The Château de Montclair rose against the grey sky like a broken tooth. Half the roof had collapsed. Broken windows were like empty eyes staring at nothing. Cracked walls, partially destroyed towers, but still standing, stubbornly standing. A rough wooden cross had been erected above the main gate, and a faded sign announced in French, "Provisional Orphanage, Children of War." "How many?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Father Antoine stopped in front of the main door. "It varies, sometimes 50, sometimes 80. Depends on how many arrive." He paused, looking at me with tired but kind eyes. "And depends on how many manage to survive." The door opened with a creak that echoed through the cold stone corridors. And that's when the smell hit me. It wasn't the smell of death I feared. It was something different. It was the smell of life desperately fighting to survive. Cheap soap, damp clothes that never dried completely, scarce food being used to feed many mouths, small bodies crammed into small spaces. "Sister Marguerite!" called Father Antoine. A small, thin woman appeared, moving with the tired efficiency of someone who had learned to do much with little. Her blue eyes, though kind, had the hardness of someone who had seen too much. "So, you're the Spanish woman," she said, assessing me as if I were a tool she needed to decide whether I would be useful or not. "The young woman who abandoned a life of luxury to come to hell. Well, I hope you're stronger than you look. Come, I'll show you why you're here." And that's when I saw them for the first time. What had been the castle's main hall had been transformed into a makeshift dormitory. Torn mattresses covered with patched sheets, thin blankets that barely protected from the cold, pillows made of rags. But everything was clean, organized with care. Someone was doing the best they could with what they had. But it wasn't the poverty that shocked me. It was what occupied that space. Children. Dozens of children. But what kind of children were these? There was a girl, perhaps 6 years old, sitting in the farthest corner, hugging her knees against her chest. Her blonde hair was cut unevenly, as if someone had tried to remove lice in a hurry. But it was her eyes that paralyzed me. Blue eyes that had seen too much, eyes too old for that childish face, eyes that had witnessed things no child should see. She stared at me with disturbing intensity for a long moment, as if she could see through my soul and assess whether I was trustworthy. And then she simply looked away, as if I weren't worthy of her attention. A boy of perhaps 8 was sitting near a broken window, making repetitive movements with his hands, as if he were digging something invisible in the air. His fingers made the same gestures repeatedly. "He's looking for his little brother," murmured Sister Marguerite in my ear. "Pierre and Paul. They were playing in the garden when the bomb fell. Pierre managed to get out of the rubble alone. But little Paul?" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "He's been digging in the air since he arrived," she continued softly, as if he could still find him, as if he could dig him up and bring him back. In the center of the room, a baby, perhaps a year old, was crying. It wasn't a cry of tantrum or ordinary hunger. It was a deep, primitive cry of absolute need. His small lungs produced a sound of pure desperation. An older girl, perhaps 12, rocked him in her arms, humming a lullaby with her voice choked by anguish and exhaustion. "The baby's mother died in childbirth during a bombing," explained Sister Marguerite, her voice impassive. She had told this story many times. "There was no midwife, no doctor. The woman was alone in the basement when labor began. The girl who was with her, Claudette, found the baby 3 days later, still alive by a miracle. Since then, she refuses to put him down. She sleeps with him. She eats with him on her lap. She's afraid that if she puts him on the ground, he'll disappear too. I walked slowly through the room. Each step revealed a new silent tragedy. A child with a scar that cut across their face from forehead to chin. A mark from bomb shrapnel. Another who murmured incessantly, "Mama, mama," like a desperate mantra, rocking back and forth. Twins who clung to each other so tightly they had finger marks on their arms. A boy of about 10, sitting alone, staring fixedly at the wall, drawing pictures in the air with his finger. Later, I would discover that he constantly drew on the walls, on the floor, on any surface. War scenes that his mind couldn't forget. But it was when I reached the darkest corner of the room that my heart finally broke. There was a girl of approximately 4 years old, with curly brown hair and large green eyes that seemed to occupy half of her small face. She was sitting on the cold stone floor, completely motionless, staring fixedly at a point on the wall. In her little hands, she held the remains of a rag doll, a toy that had once been colorful and cheerful. You could tell from the faded rags that still preserved traces of red and yellow. But now it was nothing more than dirty, tattered rags, barely holding together. "She doesn't speak," said Sister Marguerite, seeing my expression. "She arrived here a few weeks ago. A soldier found her wandering alone on a road, holding that doll. We don't know her name, where she came from, what happened to her family. She simply doesn't speak, doesn't eat unless we put food in her mouth, doesn't move unless we carry her. It's as if part of her died, and only her body continues functioning." I knelt before the girl, being careful not to make sudden movements that might frighten her. "Hello," I said softly in French, my voice as gentle as possible. "My name is Virginia. I've come to help you." She continued staring at the wall as if I were invisible, as if I didn't exist, as if nothing existed beyond that point on the wall and the destroyed doll in her hands. It was in that moment, kneeling before that child broken by the adult world, that I understood the magnitude of what I had set out to do. This wasn't just about providing food and shelter. These children didn't just need physical care. They needed someone to help them remember how to be children again, how to trust again, how to live again. How do you teach a child to smile when she's forgotten that smiles exist? How do you sing a lullaby to someone whose last familiar sound was the whistle of a falling bomb? How do you convince a 4-year-old child that it's worth speaking, worth moving, worth living? I stood up slowly, my legs trembling, not from fear but from something deeper, a mixture of horror at what those children had suffered and a fierce determination to do something about it. I felt tears burning my eyes. I took my grandmother's embroidered handkerchief from my pocket and clutched it in my hands. Father Antoine observed my reaction with clinical interest, as if he had seen this scene many times. Well-meaning volunteers would arrive, face reality, and leave the next day. "Do you still want to stay?" he asked, his voice neither hopeful nor cynical, just tired. I wiped my eyes with my grandmother's handkerchief, that small piece of delicacy and beauty amid so much horror. I looked at the embroidered blue flowers. When the world becomes too dark, look at these flowers. More than ever, I replied, and my voice sounded firmer than I expected. Because there, in that room full of small broken hearts, I discovered something about myself that I didn't know existed. I discovered that my compassion wasn't just a pretty feeling from a privileged girl. It was a force capable of facing any darkness. On the horizon, the war pulsed in metallic thunder, always present. But now I knew that the real war wasn't on the battlefield. It was there, in that room, in the fight to restore the humanity of those small beings who had forgotten they were human. And that was a war I intended to win. The first days were the hardest of my life. We woke before dawn, not by choice, but because the morning cold made the smaller children cry. And when one started, all followed in a chorus of laments that echoed through the stone corridors like the song of lost souls. My first task was to go through the mattresses, check that all the children had woken well, if anyone had fever or cough during the night. Count, recount, silently thank for each little face that looked at me. Hunger was our most faithful companion. It arrived every day, punctual, relentless. Father Antoine left every morning in his worn cart, traveling through destroyed farms and occupied cities in search of something edible. France was bleeding. Years of war had devastated the fields. The men were in forced labor camps or with the resistance. The harvests abandoned or confiscated by the Germans. Sometimes he returned with rotten turnips that needed to be washed 3 times before becoming edible. Sprouted potatoes that we cooked with skin. And all. Bread hard as stone that needed to be soaked in water to be chewable. Sometimes he returned empty-handed, and I saw despair fight against hope in his tired eyes. I learned to work miracles with almost nothing. A bone with a bit of meat that we found in an abandoned slaughterhouse could feed 40 children if I boiled it for hours. Added weeds that grew among the ruins and diluted the broth with water until it was almost transparent. But it was hot, had some flavor, and it was something. Moldy bread became a special toast when we carefully scraped off the mold and toasted it over the fire until crispy. The children thought it a delicacy. Sour milk became Virginia's cheese when I strained it in a cloth, pressed it with stones, and seasoned it with salt we got from a merchant who took pity on us. "You have the gift of transforming nothing into something," said Sister Marguerite one day, watching me prepare a soup that was more water than food. "It's a rare gift." "It's not a gift," I replied. "It's a necessity. It's love. It's the refusal to accept that there's nothing we can do." But it wasn't just bodies that needed healing. It was souls. Pierre, the 8-year-old boy who compulsively dug in the air looking for his dead little brother, was my first challenge. I observed him for days, his fingers making the same repetitive movements. Digging, always digging. His nails bled. But he continued. That's when I had an idea. "Pierre," I said softly one day, kneeling beside him. "I need help." He stopped digging for an instant and looked at me with empty eyes. "See that piece of land there in the courtyard?" I pointed to a small area near the castle wall. "I want to plant seeds there. Potatoes, if we can get them. Herbs, anything that will grow. But I need someone to dig the earth first. Someone who knows how to dig properly. Someone strong like you." Pierre looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at his own hands, stained with dried blood. "I know how to dig," he said. The first words I heard him say. "I know you do," I replied gently. "That's why I'm asking for your help." In the following days, I gave Pierre small concrete tasks. Dig holes in the garden to plant seeds that Father Antoine had gotten from a farm. Dig trenches to drain the rainwater that accumulated in the courtyard. Dig around the foundations to check for damage. And something extraordinary happened. His hands stopped bleeding because now he was digging with purpose, not with despair. His mind found some relief because now he was creating something instead of trying to unearth what was lost. Slowly, very slowly, Pierre began to dig with hope instead of pain. He began to plant life instead of searching for death. "When the potatoes grow," he told me one day, "Paul would have liked them." "Yes," I replied. my eyes burning with tears. He would have liked them very much. And that's when I learned something fundamental. Healing doesn't come from erasing pain. It comes from transforming it into something that honors what was lost, from transforming despair into purpose. And there was Celeste. Celeste, the mute 4-year-old girl who held the remains of the rag doll and stared at the wall as if she could see through it, to another world. For weeks, she remained in her corner, motionless as a stone statue, her large green eyes fixed on some distant point that only she could see. I sat beside her every day, without speaking, just present. Sometimes I hummed softly the lullabies my mother sang to me in Spain. Alla nanita nana, nanita ella, nanita ella. My voice echoed softly through the cold corridors. Sometimes I just breathed beside her, letting her know through my constant presence that she wasn't alone, that someone saw her, that someone cared. Sister Marguerite watched me with skepticism. "You're wasting your time," she said once. "Some children are too traumatized, some never recover. Then I'll sit beside her for however long she doesn't return," I replied, because no one should be alone in the darkness. It was on a rainy afternoon in October 1941, a few months after my arrival, that the miracle happened. I was mending clothes. There were always clothes to mend, holes to fix, buttons to sew back on. The gray light of the rainy day entered through the broken windows. Suddenly, I felt a little hand touch my sleeve. I looked down. My heart almost stopped. There was Celeste beside me, extending her destroyed doll toward me. Her enormous green eyes stared at me for the first time with something resembling hope. "She's broken," she murmured. The first words she had spoken since arriving. Her voice was hoarse from lack of use, weak as the rustling of dry leaves. "She's broken." I took the doll with the reverence reserved for sacred relics. Her fabric arms were torn, the stuffing coming out. The rags that formed her dress were dirty and faded. The embroidered face was stained and erased. One of the buttons, representing her eyes, was missing. "I can try to fix her," I said softly, holding that piece of sadness in my hands. Celeste nodded slowly, and for the first time since I arrived, I saw something resembling hope in her eyes. "What's her name?" I asked gently. Celeste looked at the doll for a long moment. Tears began to flow silently down her small face. "Margot," she murmured finally. "Like my little sister." I didn't ask what had happened to the real Margot. Some questions are too cruel to ask. But I knew. I could see it in the way Celeste held that doll. I could see it in the ancestral pain in her young eyes. I spent 3 days sewing that doll. I worked by candlelight while the children slept. First, I washed her carefully, using the precious soap we kept for emergencies. The water turned brown with weeks of dirt. I mended her torn arms with threads I unraveled from an old sheet. I refilled her with clean rags. I embroidered a new face for her with black thread, giving her new eyes, and a mouth that smiled gently. And then I did something my grandmother would never have imagined when she gave me that handkerchief. I took the handkerchief embroidered with small blue flowers in the corners, that precious memory of home that I carried with me, and I carefully cut a piece from it. "Forgive me, grandmother," I murmured as I cut. "But you said to look at the flowers when everything darkened, and I think Celeste needs them more than I do now." I used the delicate fabric to make a new dress for the doll Margot, a white dress with small blue flowers, the most beautiful she had ever had. When I finally finished, the doll didn't look new. It still showed signs of its passage through the war. But it was whole. It was clean. It was loved. On the morning of the 4th day, I found Celeste in her usual corner. I knelt before her and extended the doll. "I brought her back to you." I said softly. Celeste looked at the doll. Her eyes widened. Slowly, with trembling hands, she took Margot and hugged her against her chest. And then she smiled. It was a small smile, fragile as delicate glass, like the first ray of sun after an endless storm. But it was real. It was life returning to a heart that had forgotten how to beat. "The flowers," murmured Celeste, touching the doll's dress. "They're beautiful." "Yes," I replied, my voice choking with emotion. "They're special flowers. My grandmother embroidered them. She said that when everything becomes dark, we should look at the flowers and remember that beauty still exists." Celeste hugged the doll tighter. "Margot likes flowers," she said. And then, for the first time, she truly looked into my eyes. "Thank you, Virginia." Sister Marguerite, who had observed everything from afar, approached after Celeste fell asleep with Margot in her arms. "You sacrificed your handkerchief," she said softly. "The only memory of home you brought." "I didn't sacrifice it," I replied, wiping tears with what remained of the handkerchief. "I transformed it. Now my grandmother's flowers will help Celeste remember that broken things can be mended, that we can still become whole again." And it was in that moment that I understood what my grandmother truly meant. Beauty isn't in preserving things intact. Beauty is in using them to heal, in transforming them into something that matters, in giving pieces of yourself to make others whole again. In the following days, Celeste began to speak more. First murmurs, then short sentences. She began to eat without needing to be reminded. She began to move around the castle. She began to live again. And always, she carried Margot with her. The doll with the blue flower dress became her anchor, her reminder that love still existed, that affection was still possible. And there was Louis. Louis was 8 years old and drew obsessively. They weren't common childish drawings. Flowers, houses, smiling families. No, Louis drew the war. I found his drawings scattered throughout the orphanage, made with pieces of charcoal he took from the fireplace, on the stone walls, on the floor, on pieces of paper when we could find them. Soldiers falling under enemy fire, mouths open in silent screams, houses exploding in black flames, people running with terror frozen on poorly drawn but horribly expressive faces, trenches full of mud and despair. They were macabre works of art, created by the mind of a child who had absorbed too much horror. "Why do you draw this, Louis?" I asked him. One day, finding him drawing yet another terrible scene on the wall of his corner. He stopped drawing and looked at me with a seriousness that didn't befit an 8-year-old child. "Because if I don't draw them, they stay trapped inside me," he said simply. "The images in my head, if I don't put them here, they keep spinning and spinning until I go crazy." He paused, looking at the drawing. "And if I forget," he continued in a low voice, "then they died in vain. My father, my uncle, all the soldiers I saw. If I forget, it's as if they never existed." That's when I realized his drawings weren't just a traumatic compulsion. They were monuments, paper tombstones, his way of honoring the dead that only he had seen. I no longer tried to stop him from drawing, but I began to sit beside him while he drew, and I also began to suggest other things. "Louis," I said one day, "you're very talented. Your drawings are impactful. But did you know you can also draw other things? Things you'd like to see?" He looked at me confused. "I don't understand." "You draw what was," I explained gently. "But you can also draw what you hope will be, the future you want to see." I gave him a precious piece of real paper, not just a wall, and a new piece of charcoal. "Draw how you'd like the world to be when the war ends." Louis looked at the blank paper for a long time. Then, slowly, he began to draw. And for the first time, his strokes didn't form explosions and death. They formed fields, trees, and a small house, a family. Father, mother, son, holding hands. When he finished, tears ran down his face. "I had forgotten I knew how to draw beautiful things," he murmured. From that day on, Louis began to draw both. He still drew his memories of war. He needed to do so to survive. But he also began to draw hope, possible futures, worlds where children played without fear. And when our tradition of telling stories at night began, Louis was the first to volunteer to help. "Can I draw the stories?" he asked, his eyes shining for the first time since he had arrived. "It would be an honor," I replied. And so, on the cold walls of the castle, new drawings began to appear. Brave princes fighting dragons, kind princesses healing kingdoms. Dragons that, deep down, were just lonely creatures needing friends. His fingers, which before only knew how to draw death, now also knew how to draw life. It was on a stormy night in November 1941 that Henri arrived. The wind howled through the castle's broken windows. The rain beat on the stones like war drums. We were all gathered near the fireplace when we heard desperate knocking at the door. Father Antoine ran to open the door. A wounded soldier, barely able to stand, stumbled in, carrying a small bundle in his arms. His uniform was soaked with rain and stained with blood from a shoulder wound. Opening the bundle, I found a baby, more dead than alive. The child was severely malnourished. His small body looked like a wounded bird. He had a high fever. His skin burned to the touch. His lips were cracked and bleeding from dehydration. His eyes were sunken in their sockets. "I found him in a bombed house 3 days ago," said the soldier before fainting from exhaustion and his own wound. Alone, crying so weakly I almost didn't hear him. I don't know if his parents died or if they fled and couldn't return. I tried to feed him, but he can barely swallow. Sister Marguerite examined the baby and shook her head sadly. "He's very weak, Virginia, very dehydrated. Probably also has pneumonia because of the fever. There's not much we can do beyond keeping him comfortable." "No," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "I won't accept that." I took the baby in my arms. He weighed almost nothing, less than a kitten, and settled into a chair near the fireplace, where the fire still burned. "What are you going to do?" asked Sister Marguerite. "I'm going to stay with him. I'm going to feed him. I'm going to warm him. And I'm going to convince him that it's worth living." For 3 days and 3 nights, I didn't leave that chair. I fed the baby drop by drop with warm milk mixed with a bit of the precious sugar we were saving. At first, he could barely swallow. I placed a drop on his lips and waited. I massaged his throat gently. I spoke soft words of encouragement. "Come on, my little one. Just 1 more drop. That's it. You can do it." I used my own body to warm him, keeping him against my chest so he could hear my heartbeat. I sang to him all the songs I knew in Spanish and French, until my voice was hoarse and then mute. "Alla nanita nana, nanita ella." The other children came to bring me water. Celeste sat beside me with Margot, humming softly. Pierre brought me an extra blanket he had washed in the river. Louis drew a small angel on the wall near me. "To protect the baby," he said. On the 2nd day, the baby began to swallow a bit more. On the 3rd day, his fever decreased slightly. But on the morning of the 4th day, he worsened again. His breathing became shallow. His small body became cold, despite the fire, despite me holding him close. I began to doubt. Maybe Sister Marguerite was right. Maybe he was too weak. Maybe it was too late. I looked at what remained of my grandmother's handkerchief, now with a piece missing, used in Margot's dress. "When everything darkens," Look at the flowers." "No," I murmured to the baby, tears running down my face. "You're not going to give up. And neither am I. You're going to live, my little one. You're going to be strong. You're going to have a life. I promise." I continued to feed him. I continued to warm him. I continued to sing. And on the morning of the 5th day, he opened his eyes and cried. Not a weak cry. A loud, furious, healthy cry. The most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my life. "My God," murmured Sister Marguerite, appearing upon hearing the sound. "The Lord brought him back. The Lord saved him. It was love," I replied, exhausted but triumphant. Stubborn, persistent love that refuses to accept defeat. I named the baby Henri. Henri grew strong and healthy. In the following weeks, he became our little ray of sunshine, always smiling, always extending his chubby little arms to whoever needed a hug. And he taught me something crucial. Sometimes, saving a life is simply refusing to give up. It's sitting beside the darkness and lighting candle after candle until the light returns. May 8th, 1945, dawned gray and cold. But there was something different in the air. A silence that wasn't just the absence of bombings, but something deeper, more definitive. Father Antoine came running to the orphanage, his face flushed from effort under the spring winds. His hands trembled, not from cold, but from emotion, as he gathered us in the main hall. "It's official," he said, his voice choked. "Germany has surrendered. The war is over." The silence that followed his words was deafening. The children watched us, with the weariness they had learned to display in the face of any news, good or bad. Henri, who was about to turn 4, grabbed my skirt and murmured, "What does that mean, Virginia?" "It means peace, my little one," I replied, picking him up in my arms. "It means the fighting is over." But even as I spoke those words, I felt a strange emptiness settle in my chest. Relief? Yes. Relief so intense it was almost physical, as if an enormous weight had been lifted from my shoulders. But there was also something more, a feeling of being adrift, as if I had been torn from my purpose, and fear of what would come next. In the days that followed, the reality of post-war showed itself more complex than any of us had anticipated. Government representatives arrived to assess the situation. Men in suits, with clipboards and bureaucratic expressions, talked about relocation and reintegration, as if our children were numbers on a spreadsheet. "Many of these children have living relatives," explained a thin official with glasses. "Uncles, grandparents, distant cousins. We need to reunite them with their families." "And what about those who have no one?" I asked, my voice firmer than I felt. He consulted his documents. "They'll be distributed among official government orphanages, appropriate institutions with adequate infrastructure." Institutions. That word chilled my blood. I knew those institutions. Large gray buildings where children became numbers, where love was rationed and individuality discouraged. Places where Pierre would return to digging the air in despair, where Celeste would stop speaking again, where Henri would lose his smile. That night I sat in the garden that Pierre had cultivated with so much care. The plants had survived the winter. Small green shoots emerged from the earth like promises of spring. The first potato had sprouted. Pierre watered it every day with the devotion of someone caring for a treasure. It was there, contemplating those signs of persistent life, that I made the most important decision of my life. I wouldn't return to Spain. I wouldn't return to my comfortable life, to my silk dresses and family dinners, to the White House with blue-tiled courtyards, to the orange tree garden. That Virginia had died, that Virginia had been buried with each tear I wiped, each child I hugged, each smile I won, each piece of my grandmother's handkerchief, I transformed into hope. This Virginia, forged by the flames of suffering and tempered by unconditional love, had work to do, and there was no turning back. "Sister Marguerite," I said the next morning, "I need to talk to you." I found her in what had been the castle library, trying to organize the few books we had managed to gather for the children. "I want to stay," I said bluntly. "I'm not going back to Spain." She stopped arranging the books and looked at me with those blue eyes that had already seen so much. "And what do you intend to do?" "Take care of them," I replied. "All those who have nowhere to go. Create a real home, not an institution. A place where each child is seen, known, and loved." Sister Marguerite nodded slowly, as if it were no surprise. "It will be difficult," she said. "It will be expensive. The government won't easily support private initiatives. Then we'll find another way." And we did. The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity. I wrote letters to charitable institutions throughout Europe, to churches, to humanitarian organizations. I told our story. I told about Celeste and Margot, about Pierre and his garden, about Henri and his miracle, about Louis and his drawings of hope. I sold the last jewels I had brought from Spain, my grandmother's pearl necklace, my mother's sapphire earrings. Each piece sold was a piece of my old life, transformed into a future for these children. Father Antoine used his contacts in the church to help us deal with French bureaucracy. Sister Marguerite wrote to several convents, asking for donations. Slowly, miraculously, money began to arrive. Small amounts from ordinary people who read our letters and were moved. Larger donations from organizations that saw value in what we were doing. And little by little, we also began to find families for our children. Louis was reunited with an aunt who lived near Marseille. She was an art teacher and was amazed by his drawings. We cried when he left, but they were tears of joy when we saw that his last drawings for us showed people smiling, green fields, bright futures. "I'll draw you every day," he promised. "And when I grow up, I'll be a real artist. I'll make paintings so beautiful that people will forget the war existed." Pierre was taken in by a farming couple on the outskirts of Lyon, who were delighted with his talent for growing plants. Before leaving, he planted a rose bush in the garden, a seedling that Father Antoine had gotten from a nursery that was reopening. "So you'll remember me," he said with the seriousness of an adult man. "And when it blooms, you'll know I'm well, that I'm planting red roses like my grandmother's, as she would have liked." Claudette and the baby she had saved were adopted together by a family that couldn't have children. They wanted both, a 12-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old son, an instant family, fruit of an unlikely love. But many children remained. Celeste, who now spoke in complete sentences but still carried Margot everywhere. Henri, officially an orphan. No family was found. Others like them. Small souls torn from their roots, needing new soil to grow. For these children, 16 in all, we created more than an orphanage. We created a family. We managed to buy a large house on the outskirts of Reims, a property that had been damaged by bombings but was structurally sound, and more importantly, it had large gardens where children could run, play, and be children. With the help of volunteers and donations, we transformed that place into a true home. There were no collective dormitories like in the makeshift castle. Each child had their own bed with clean sheets, their own drawer to keep their personal belongings, their own candle to light at night if they were afraid of the dark. We had a real kitchen where we taught the children to cook, where we made bread that perfumed the entire house, We had a library with real books donated by schools and libraries throughout France. We had a classroom where we learned not only to read and write, but also to dream. And we had simple rules written on a wooden sign at the entrance. Here you are seen. Here you are heard. Here you are loved. The years passed like seasons. Our little house grew. We welcomed more children, war orphans, whose echoes continued even after its official end. Destroyed families, fathers who never returned, mothers who died of disease, children abandoned, even in peacetime, by parents who couldn't feed them. Each arrived carrying pain, each left carrying hope. I learned that healing isn't linear. It isn't quick. It's a slow process of planting seeds, watering them with patience, and waiting with faith for something to sprout. Celeste, who had arrived mute and fragile at 4 years old, by 10 was a talkative girl full of dreams. She wanted to be a teacher, teach other children. "Like you taught me, Virginia," she would say. "Like you taught me that I can still have a future, that broken things can be mended." And she became a teacher. At 22, she graduated from normal school and began working with children with special needs. Children that no one else wanted to teach. Children who were too difficult. "There are no difficult children," she told me once. "There are children who are suffering, and pain needs patience, not punishment." At her wedding, at 25, she carried Margot in her arms. The doll was now over 20 years old. The blue flower dress was faded but still whole. Celeste placed it on the altar during the ceremony. "This doll saved me," she said in her speech. "It reminded me that broken things can be mended, that we can still become whole again." And Virginia, who cut a piece from her own heart to make this doll's dress, taught me that love isn't about keeping precious things. It's about transforming them into miracles. Henri became an engineer. He studied in Paris with a scholarship we obtained from a benefactor who believed in our mission. By 28, he was already building bridges throughout France. "Bridges are important," he told me once during a visit. "They connect places that were separated. They allow people to meet. They allow commerce to happen. They allow life to move forward." He paused, his eyes now those of an adult man, but still with that childlike sparkle he never lost, looking at me with love. "Just as you built bridges between our broken hearts and hope, Virginia. You were the first bridge of my life, and now I build bridges for other people." Pierre became a professional gardener. By 30, he had his own nursery specializing in roses, red roses specifically. "Like my grandmother's," he always said. She would have been proud. He created gardens for schools, hospitals, and nursing homes, places where beauty was necessary, where hope needed to be planted. "Gardens heal," he explained to me once while we planted together in our house's garden. "They don't heal everything. They don't bring back those we lost. But they remind people that life continues, that beauty still exists, that it's worth waking up in the morning just to see a rose bloom." And our house continued to exist through the years, through decades, with children needing a home. We trained other caregivers, people who learned that a wounded child needs more than food and shelter, needs to be seen, heard, and loved. Our little house became a model. Other houses were opened following our principles, in Lyon, in Marseille, in Paris. A network of homes where love was the foundation, not the exception. We helped thousands of children over 70 years. Each is unique, each loved, each remembered. I won't lie. There were dark nights, nights when doubt whispered, "Is it worth it? You sacrificed your own life. You never married. You never had children. Your family in Spain never completely forgave you. Is it worth it? There were moments of exhaustion so deep I could barely get out of bed. Moments when the weight of so many stories, so many pains, so many responsibilities seemed greater than I could bear. There were criticisms, people saying I had wasted my life, that I should have returned to Spain, married well, started a real family, that it was selfish to dedicate myself to strangers instead of giving grandchildren to my parents. My father died without ever visiting me in France. My mother came once, years after the war, and cried when she saw the simple house where I lived, so different from the mansion where I was raised. You could have had everything, she said. Why did you choose this? Because everything without purpose is nothing, I replied. And this, these children, this love, is all that matters. But then I looked around. I saw Celeste teaching children with disabilities, showing the same patience she received. I saw her own children grow up knowing their mother barely spoke until she was 5, and that love brought her back. I saw Henri building bridges that connected communities separated by rivers, allowing isolated villages to prosper. I saw Pierre creating gardens that nourished not just bodies but souls, bringing beauty to gray places. I saw dozens, hundreds of lives we touched, that we transformed, that we saved. And I realized I hadn't wasted anything. I transformed privilege into purpose, luxury into love, comfort into compassion. I had hundreds of children, thousands of grandchildren, a legacy that will multiply for generations. The price of love isn't sacrifice, it's transformation. It's exchanging a small, safe life for a large, meaningful life. It's choosing to shine like a candle that illuminates others instead of remaining intact in the darkness. And I would pay that price 1,000 times because I discovered something many never learn. Life isn't about how long we live, but about how much love we manage to experience in that time. And I fit in a lot of love. Now, at 97 years old, I hold my grandmother's handkerchief. It's worn, yellowed by time, part of the blue. Embroidery has faded, pieces are missing, the ones I used to mend Celeste's doll, to cover wounds, to wipe away the tears of hundreds of children. But it remains my most precious treasure, because this handkerchief taught me something fundamental. Beauty isn't remaining intact. Beauty is in being used for purposes greater than ourselves. This handkerchief was made to be kept in a drawer, preserved, protected. My grandmother embroidered it with love, hoping it would last generations, whole and perfect. But I used it. I tore pieces to make a doll's dress. I used it to wipe tears, to bandage wounded fingers, to cover hands trembling from cold. Is it destroyed? Yes. But look at what was created with its pieces. A mute girl who spoke again. A doll that brought hope, comfort for dozens of frightened children. Proof that love is worth more than preservation. We weren't made to remain intact. We were made to be used, worn out, given away. And when we give ourselves completely, when we allow parts of us to be used to heal others, we don't become smaller. We become living monuments of love. This torn handkerchief is worth more than 1,000 perfect handkerchiefs kept in drawers. Because this handkerchief lived, was loved, transformed, like me. I know my time is coming to an end. My body is tired. My hands tremble. My vision is blurred. Each movement requires effort. But my heart is complete. I lived 97 years, 76 of them dedicated to children who needed a mother. Grandmother, anchor in the storm. I didn't marry. I didn't have biological children. I didn't accumulate wealth. But I had an immense family, a wealth of purpose, a legacy that will cross generations. And when I depart, and I know it will be soon, I'll depart in peace, because I discovered a secret that many never learn. We're not measured by how much we accumulate, but by how much we give. It doesn't matter the size of your house. What matters is how many people you welcomed in your heart. It doesn't matter how much money you saved. What matters is how much love you distributed. I look at my grandmother's handkerchief. When everything darkens, look at the flowers. The embroidered flowers have faded, but I still see them, still remember their beauty. And I realize I became like those flowers, faded by time, worn by use, torn by love. But still here, still witnessing, still whispering to the next generation. When the world darkens, choose to be light. When hate screams, choose to love. When all seems lost, choose to plant flowers in winter. Because flowers planted in winter are the most resistant, deeper roots, a sweeter perfume when they finally bloom. And I planted an entire garden, a garden of children who learned to bloom again, who scattered seeds wherever they went, who are now planting their own gardens. This is my legacy, not a perfect handkerchief kept in a drawer, but a handkerchief that lived, loved, used to the end. Not a safe, insignificant life, but a large, meaningful life that touched thousands. My name is Virginia Castillo. I'm 97 years old, and this is my proof that a life dedicated to love is never wasted. Now, as the afternoon sun sets over Valencia, painting the sky gold and pink, I close my eyes and smile. The scent of jasmine still lingers in the air. The torn handkerchief still rests in my hands. And my heart is complete. My work here is finished.
Virginia Castillo is a fictional character, but her story was inspired by real women who gave their lives to caring for war orphans during and after the First World War. Volunteers from Spain, France, Belgium, and many nations truly crossed borders to help children shattered by conflict. Improvised orphanages in bombed-out castles truly existed. The stories of healing through love and patience are real. This is my homage to these women, forgotten by history, but eternal in the hearts they... Virginia's story is one of many. Subscribe to keep these forgotten voices alive.